This isn't just some story I cooked up for entertainment. This is a part of my life I've never spoken about until now, a memory sealed away like a toxic chemical. The air in the private dining room at Alinea in Chicago was thick with the scent of truffle oil and triumph. In my pocket, my fingers nervously traced the velvet box containing a custom-made sapphire ring, its deep blue color perfectly matching her eyes. Tonight was the culmination of everything. I was about to announce my engagement to Ava, the love of my life, and celebrate the final funding approval for the Solstice Tower, the skyscraper that was my architectural masterpiece. My best friend and business partner, Julian Thorne, raised his champagne flute, his charismatic smile catching the light. But as he began to speak, the words that came out weren't a toast to our success, they were the clean, precise cuts of a scalpel severing my life from his. And so, he announced to the stunned table of investors and city officials, "I'd like you all to join me in celebrating the future of my company, and my future bride, Ava." If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. Our firm was Vance & Thorne Architecture. I was David Vance, the artist, the one who lived and breathed blueprints and impossible angles. Julian was the face, the dealmaker. He could sell a blizzard to a polar bear and make it sound like a luxury. We had been inseparable since our days at the Illinois Institute of Technology, two sides of the same coin, destined to build an empire together. Then came Ava. She was a whirlwind, a brilliant market analyst who understood our vision instantly. She and I fell hard and fast. She became the third pillar of our foundation, or so I thought. Looking back, the signs were all there, like hairline fractures in a wall you refuse to see until it collapses on top of you. The late nights Julian and Ava spent alone at the office, supposedly poring over financial projections. The hushed phone calls that would abruptly end when I entered a room. The way she'd gently deflect any conversation about setting a wedding date, blaming the stress of the Solstice Tower launch. I wrote it all off as collective ambition, the price of greatness. I was a fool. The moment Julian's words hung in the air at that dinner, Ava wouldn't even look at me. Her gaze was fixed on him, a chilling portrait of allegiance. The next morning, my keycard to our office on Wacker Drive was denied. My corporate accounts were frozen. My email was locked. Julian's lawyer, a man I'd never met, sent a courier with a document package. It contained a copy of our partnership agreement with a neatly highlighted dissolution clause I had never seen before, along with a check for a fraction of what my shares were worth. My signature was on the signature line, a perfect, damning forgery. They hadn't just planned a coup, they had orchestrated an erasure. My entire professional and personal life, dismantled in less than 12 hours. I retreated to my empty Lincoln Park condo, the silence pressing in on me. I spent days in a daze, replaying every moment, every lie, every stolen glance I had misinterpreted as friendship or love. It was there, drowning in financial statements and old project files on my personal hard drive, that I found it. A single, password-protected folder I'd never seen before. Its name was simple, but it sent a sliver of ice through my veins: contingency. It took me 3 weeks to break the encryption on Julian's contingency folder. 3 weeks of my life savings dwindling away, of ignoring calls from my worried family, of subsisting on coffee and cold fury. While my world shrank to the four walls of my condo, Julian's was exploding. He and Ava were the new darlings of Chicago. They were on the cover of Chicago Architect magazine, standing arm in arm before a shimmering rendering of my Solstice Tower. The headline read, "Julian Thorne's Singular Vision." The article painted me as a footnote, a former partner who amicably stepped away to pursue smaller, personal projects. The lie was so audacious, so complete, it was almost impressive. It felt like reading my own obituary. Finally, one rainy Tuesday, the password broke. The contents of the folder laid their plan bare in cold, chronological detail. There were 2 versions of our partnership agreement, the one we'd both signed and the altered one with the dissolution clause. There were emails between him and Ava stretching back nearly a year, meticulously plotting my removal. They mocked my designs even as they planned to build them, called my passion my fatal flaw, and laughed about how easy it was to manipulate the dreamer. They had even set up a shell corporation, registered in Delaware, to acquire my devalued shares for pennies, ensuring not a single dollar of the Solstice Project's future profits would ever reach me. The betrayal was deeper and more venomous than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't a spontaneous act of greed, it was a long, patient assassination of my life. Armed with this digital smoking gun, I felt a surge of hope. This was it. This was the proof that would undo them. I secured consultations with 3 of the most powerful litigation firms in the loop. I sat in their plush, mahogany-paneled conference rooms overlooking Lake Michigan and laid out the entire sordid story. They all had the same reaction. They'd scroll through the files, their expressions shifting from interest to professional sympathy. The final verdict was always the same. The forged signature was a masterwork, indistinguishable from my own. The emails were incriminating but legally circumstantial. Julian had built a fortress of plausible deniability. It would be my word against his, and he now had the wealth of our stolen company to bury me in legal fees until I was destitute. Mr. Vance, the last lawyer on LaSalle Street, told me, his voice soft with pity, "You've been surgically removed. I'm sorry. But the law can't help you here." I walked out of that law office into the biting Chicago wind, a hollowed-out man. The law wouldn't help. Justice wasn't coming. I sold my condo, moved into a cramped studio apartment in Pilsen, and took a soul-crushing job doing CAD work for a firm that designed strip malls. My name, once whispered with respect in the halls of architectural innovation, was now attached to blueprints for nail salons and mattress stores. I was a ghost haunting my own life, watching from the sidelines as Julian and Ava lived the future that was supposed to be mine. He was on TV cutting ribbons, she was chairing charity balls. They were royalty, and I was a peasant exiled from my own kingdom. The turning point didn't come in a flash of lightning. It arrived quietly, on a rumbling Brown Line L train. The train paused on the elevated tracks near the merchandise mart, and through the grimy window, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the Solstice Tower. It was nearly finished, a magnificent spear of glass and steel piercing the gray sky. A massive banner draped down its side featured a photo of Julian and Ava, their faces beaming with success. Below them, 5 words, "The Thorn Group, building Chicago's future." Something inside me snapped. Despair that had been my constant companion for months burned away, replaced by a rage so cold and clean it felt like serenity. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had rewritten my history and were building their future on its ashes. They called me a dreamer. They mocked my passion. Fine. They built their empire with my dreams. I would dismantle it with my knowledge. I wouldn't use the law. I would use the one thing they could never truly take from me, the building itself. I designed it. I knew every beam, every weld, every secret whispered in its steel skeleton. Julian only ever saw the price tag. I knew its soul. I went home, dug out my original, unaltered blueprints from a forgotten external drive, and began to search. I was looking for a signature, a tiny flourish I'd hidden deep within the design, a secret known only to its creator. And when I found it, a chilling smile spread across my face. I finally knew how to turn my greatest creation into their tomb. My secret was buried in the design of the 3 ornamental spires that crowned the Solstice Tower. They weren't just for aesthetics, they housed the building's telecommunications array. In my original specs, I had called for a custom fabricated steel alloy for the spire's internal support struts and expensive, bespoke material I'd helped develop. It had a unique resonant frequency, a small vanity project of mine to make the building subtly hum a specific harmonic chord in the high winds off Lake Michigan. It was an architect's poetry, a detail so obscure and costly that I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, Julian would have cut it to save a few $100,000. His greed was the one variable I could always count on. I pulled the city building codes and the fabricator's specs. The cheaper, standard-grade steel he would have used was structurally sound under normal conditions. It wouldn't fail catastrophically. But it had a vulnerability. It lacked the dampening properties of my custom alloy. If subjected to a powerful, focused sonic frequency, the right note, played loud enough, it would resonate violently. It would create thousands of invisible microfractures, not enough to topple the tower, but more than enough to be detected by inspectors. The ensuing scandal, the multi-million-dollar repairs, and the revelation of his cutting corners on a landmark project would shatter his reputation for good. The first step was getting inside. I created a fake identity, got a job with the non-union overnight cleaning crew, and became one of the invisible people who scrubbed the floors and polished the brass of my own stolen masterpiece. For weeks, I learned the security patrols, mapped the CCTV blind spots, and memorized the access routes to the spire's maintenance junction in the uppermost service level. While I mopped and buffed, I began my digital assault. Using encrypted browsers at public libraries, I started posting on obscure forums for structural engineers and metallurgists. Posing as a disgruntled subcontractor, I dropped anonymous, highly technical posts questioning the integrity of the Solstice Tower's spire construction, citing rumors of material swaps and cut corners. The whispers started. The night before the grand opening gala, I was pushing a mop bucket through the gleaming marble lobby. The air was electric with anticipation. And then, they walked right past me. Julian, in a tailored tuxedo, and Ava, dripping in diamonds, laughing about something on his phone. They didn't even glance at the man in the gray janitor's uniform. To them, I was just part of the scenery. The grand opening gala was to be Julian's coronation. The mayor, the governor, every real estate tycoon and society columnist in Chicago would be there, sipping champagne and celebrating the man who had reshaped the city's skyline. My plan was a symphony of destruction with 3 movements. The first was the sonic emitter, a repurposed industrial device used for materials testing, which I'd bought for cash from a salvage yard. The second was Julian's ego. He was scheduled to give the keynote address, a victory lap that would be broadcast on a 20-foot-tall screen behind the stage. But during my weeks as a ghost in his machine, I had gained access to the building's central AV control system. I had a different presentation queued up. The third movement was his hidden crime. The contingency folder had contained more than just his betrayal of me. It held encrypted transaction logs between his shell corporation and a notoriously corrupt city alderman. Julian hadn't just forged my signature, he'd bribed his way through Chicago's notoriously difficult permitting process. It had taken me months of obsessive work, but I had finally broken the encryption. I had the bank statements. I had the emails. I had him. An hour before the party started, I slipped away from my cleaning crew. In a small maintenance closet on the 90th floor, 2 levels below the spires, I set up the emitter. I calibrated the frequency, aimed it at the central support beam of the main spire, and set it on a timer. It would activate exactly 20 minutes into Julian's speech. That's when the building would begin to scream. From the closet, I used a burner laptop to patch into the AV system. I uploaded my file, a simple, brutal slideshow, the illegal bank transfers, the incriminating emails, and a final, damning slide comparing the real partnership agreement to his forgery. I was ready. I patched into a live security feed on my tablet and watched as the grand ballroom filled with Chicago's elite. I saw Julian take the stage to thunderous applause. He flashed that brilliant, predatory smile that had once charmed me and had now damned him. Welcome, his voice boomed through the speakers, to the house that Thorne built. In the darkness of the closet, surrounded by the smell of ozone and cleaning supplies, I smiled back at the screen. You have no idea. Julian's speech was a masterpiece of arrogance. He talked about his vision, his tenacity, his unwavering commitment to excellence. He gave a nauseatingly sweet tribute to Ava, his muse and partner in all things, who watched from the front row, beaming. Outside the ballroom, however, my digital whispers had grown into a roar. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune, who had been following the anonymous tips on the engineering forums, got a text from a source confirming irregularities in the steel inspection reports. He showed his phone to a colleague. A low murmur, a current of unease, began to ripple through the clusters of journalists at the back of the room. Precisely 20 minutes into the speech, as Julian was building to his crescendo, it began. A low, deep hum, a vibration felt more in your bones than in your ears. Glasses on cocktail tables began to tremble. A few people looked up at the ceiling, confused. The hum grew into a deep, resonant groan, the sound of stressed metal. The entire skyscraper was moaning in agony. Panic began to flicker in the eyes of the crowd. Julian faltered, his smile frozen on his face. Just the building settling, he stammered, trying to laugh it off. That was my cue. I hit the enter key. On the massive screen behind him, his triumphant face vanished, replaced by a crisp, clear image of a bank statement showing a $2 million transfer from his shell corporation to the alderman. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The groan of the building became the soundtrack to his ruin. As the tower shuddered, slide after slide exposed him. The emails detailing the bribery. The evidence of the financial fraud. Ava's face collapsed into a mask of pure horror as she realized she was just another pawn in his game. Then came the final slide, our 2 partnership agreements, side by side, my real signature next to his perfect forgery. It was over. The murmurs erupted into shouts. People were scrambling for the exits, terrified the building was coming down. I didn't stay to watch the final act. I packed my gear, shed my janitor's uniform, and calmly walked out a service exit into the cool chaos of the Chicago night, the approaching wail of sirens my standing ovation. Months later, from my small new office in the West Loop, I looked out at the skyline. The Solstice Tower was still there, a dark, empty monument tied up in federal investigations and a dozen lawsuits. They called it Thorn's Folly now. Sometimes, on windy nights, people who live nearby say you can still hear a faint, sorrowful hum coming from its darkened spires. They think it's the wind. But I know it's the sound of a house built on lies, screaming in the dark. The end.